All right. I'm gonna go fight Artorias. I felt like thinking out loud about some differences between Dark Souls and Sekiro. And I know of one particular way to do this that is very personal and familiar to me, which is to punch out Artorias. Well, I shouldn't act like I'm going to finish punching Artorias. I'm just going to punch Artorias for a while. And the air conditioner's on at the moment, so there's extra white noise. But I think the mic is being captured adequately. I might talk a little bit more if someone shows up in the chat, but if no one does, then I might just start talking in the fight. So this is New Game Plus. I have no hope of actually beating Artorias without a weapon. But I can dodge him. I can also... Hello, Kaz. I'm here to do something that I can do without thinking very hard, which is dodge Artorias. Kaz, I should warn you that this stream is intended to talk about some differences between Dark Souls and Sekiro. So if you want actual no spoilers whatsoever about Sekiro, then this is not the stream for you. I'm not going to talk about the content of Sekiro, only some of the mechanics. Uh-oh. Charles has to watch an ad. So... yeah. Alright. Catch you later, Kaz. But, so, this morning I was fighting the last boss of Sekiro. And, while I had it fresh in my mind, I wanted to compare that with this thing that I am very familiar with, and refresh my memory for how this feels, because how Sekiro feels is very fresh, since I've done that a lot recently. But and Sekiro and Dark Souls are similar and different. So, specifically what I wanted to talk about the most was dodging and deflecting in frames. Because one of the fundamental concepts in, frankly, most From Software games is the like, dexterity challenge of... Who the hell's out there? Oh, that's just a player. I saw a ghost. There he is. Saw him coming through the door and thought it was an NPC. Anyway. Where was I? Frames? Yes. So, the dexterity challenge. So... Charles says the 3Ds, dodging, deflecting, and deframes. Yeah. Just so. So, in Dark Souls, there's like parrying, which is like deflecting. And there's also dodging. In Dark Souls, parrying and deflecting are both mediated by things that are on the order of 0.2 of a second. to get very numerical, most shield parry animations have about 7 or 8, oops, that's fine. 7 or 8 frames of like active parry. And so you have to hold on. One difference between Dark Souls and Sekiro is the key bindings are different, and so if I try to do the key inputs from Sekiro in Dark Souls, the wrong thing happens. So you might see that continue to happen, but don't worry about it. Anyway, yes. Parrying has about 7 frames, give or take, of active timing in a 30 frames per second game. Presumably in a 60 frame per second game, all those numbers get doubled, but never mind. We'll just talk about things as if they're 30 frames per second. So 7 out of 30 frames is not quite a fifth of a second. 8 out of 30 frames is between a fifth and a fourth of a second. It's like 4/15ths. And there's a similar time constraint on dodging, because your invincibility frames are also about 7 frames. So we can shortcut all these things to be about a fifth of a second, which is to say, like, I guess 6 frames would be exactly a fifth of a second. These are only a few frames more than that in most cases. Now, 0.2 of a second is an important number because that is about the amount of time it takes for a signal from your brain to get down to your hands. So it's relevant that the parry timing, yeah, is a window on the same time scale as a nerve impulse from your brain to your, extremities. Now, we should not assume that these things were intended to be actually exactly the same, or that, in fact, they are simultaneous, because they are not simultaneous. Obviously, they are consecutive, because in addition to the hardware in your brain and in your body, there's also, like, the travel of the buttons on the controller, and then, like, a couple, like, much smaller timescales of sending the electrical signal to the computer and, like, having it being processed. But in any case, so everything between, like, the nerve impulse getting down to your hands and then actually having some effect in the game software it's really hard to say exactly how much time that takes, but it's going to be a couple of frames, but that part's not very important. The point being that, like, in order to parry or dodge properly in Dark Souls, you don't have a lot of time. And so you have to have, by the time you need to be in your invincibility frames, for example, since that's what's important for Artorias, for dodging, you need to be in your invincibility frames when the attack hits you. That means that the signal in your brain had to originate, at minimum, about 2 or 3/10 of a second earlier, so that the signal went through your brain into your hands, and you actually push the button. Usually the combination of buttons, because you have usually, to dodge, you have to be holding a direction. So both hands have to be doing stuff. So that's like the basic regime of timescales in Dark Souls for the important stuff, which is dodging and parrying. And then, for example, something like drinking an Estus flask that takes a long time, relatively speaking. is paying a major time cost, because it means you're locked in place for a little while. Anyway, now I don't know exactly what the frame information is for Sekiro, but actually, before I start talking about Sekiro, I should back up a little bit. So because you have to, like, again, you have to recognize you have to be in iframes, you know, some fraction of a second in the future, and so you have to be sending that signal to make that input, you know, in advance. It means that Dark Souls is a game about reading tells. Whether that's an attack tell to parry or an attack tell to dodge. Basically every attack cannot come out instantly, because you would never be able to parry or dodge it. So it has to have a tell, which most of the time is some kind of wind-up. Like, there are other sorts of tells, but that's the most common kind. Which, like, real-life attacks also do have wind-ups. Like, if you want to be able to punch something in real life, you probably need to wind up in some manner. But reading tells is like, at least for combat in Dark Souls. Like, there are other gameplay elements to Dark Souls other than combat. I just want to talk about these specific elements of combat today. So, reading tells is the most important thing, you know, for what I'm talking about, and is the element that I want to talk about compared to Sekiro that I think is different in feeling. It's the fundamentals are still basically the same, but there are some differences. In the Artorias boss fight, you know, now that I've been doing it for a while, you can see all the tells. You know, Artorias winds up for all of his attacks, sometimes in really conspicuous ways. And, I mean, the challenge of one of the reasons why people say that Dark Souls is a hard game, and then sort of stop saying that a few after they've beaten the game a few times, is that once you know how to read the tells, the game's not very hard. You get muscle memory that tells you what to do whenever you see a specific tell. And then your brain, like, you're still thinking on some level, but not very much. You kind of stop thinking and start dancing. It's kind of, so it's, you know, it has a rhythm-ish component. But before you know the tells, the game's very hard, because, like, okay, you might see an enemy winding up, but that doesn't mean you actually know how far in advance the attack is actually coming. So you all oftentimes see, you know, this is the very common new player mistake of parrying too early. Like, they'll see the start of some kind of wind up and they'll know they want to parry it, but they don't have the muscle memory to know when the attack's actually coming. So they'll just sort of parry, and, you know, they'll just guess at parry timing. And most of the time they'll guess early, because they'll just hit the left trigger button as soon as they see any kind of wind up happening. So learning all that timing is the process of getting better at Dark Souls. And so at the start of the game you don't know anything. Like, you might be able to recognize what a wind up is, but that doesn't tell you anything about when it actually is coming. You only learn when it's actually coming through practice. Trill says, Dark Souls is a game of rules, much like a routine with an objective rating or whatever. I'm not sure what you mean by objective rating, but possibly. Anyway, so the challenge in Dark Souls and in Sekiro is about learning tells, because you're going to fail them almost every time you see them for the first time, and then you try to get better at it, and some people are just, like, not wired to work that way, and so they never really enjoy themselves in Dark Souls, and Dark Souls is not a good game for them. They can play other games, and that's fine. I think that, you know, the reputation for difficulty in Dark Souls is a little overrated, but I'm not really gonna launch into a difficulty think piece right now. I just want to talk about frames. So, now I think I have laid the groundwork enough that I can talk about some differences between Dark Souls and Sekiro. So, one of the reasons I wanted to do this stream at all is that when I play Sekiro, it mentally drains me in a way that I don't feel when I play Dark Souls. And I wanted to sort of work that out loud. And one possible explanation for why that might be is just because I've played Dark Souls so much more. I've played, at this point, something like 1,200 or 1,300 hours of Dark Souls. And, I mean, I can do this, for example, without real... And I can talk at the same time. Like, when I'm doing something difficult in Sekiro, I can't talk at the same time. But, you know, obviously, you know, it's possible that the only major difference that we're talking about here is just the level of time investment, and, you know, once I have played 1,000 hours of Sekiro, I won't have the same sort of mental exhaustion that I experience when I play it. And I should define what I mean. Like, after I play I flat cannot play Sekiro for more than like 2 or 3 hours. Like 3 hours of Sekiro, if I'm doing anything challenging at all, I'm very drained after playing Sekiro for 2 hours, and really 3 hours is I have like one Sekiro stream in my stream archive that's 3 hours, and everything else is between 1 and 2 hours basically. So, and I feel physical and mental effects after playing Sekiro. Like after I stop playing for several hours afterward, like I can kind of feel like my brain isn't quite working as well as it does ordinarily. Like I have a hard time. Like I can go on autopilot, like if I needed to stop and take a shower or something like that, I know how to do all those things, but like mental processes for planning and other higher cognition just feel a little bit slower after I've been playing Sekiro for a while. And maybe that happened to me when I was playing Dark Souls. I don't really remember exactly what it felt like to like play Dark Souls for 2 hours and then stop 5 years ago. I don't quite remember it feeling quite like this, but it was a little while ago, so playing Dark Souls for a long time does color your judgment. So in any case, playing Sekiro for a long time tires me out, and I wanted to like think about why. And another possible reason why is that, like, if the tells in Sekiro are just faster, which is to say, like, there still are tells, obviously. The game couldn't function if there weren't. But, like, certainly if you compare the final boss of Sekiro to Artorias here, I feel like Artorias' tells are simpler. Certainly, like a lot of the basic sword swings of the final boss of Sekiro, he has a lot more close-in work that timing deflections of those things took a fair bit of practice, and like a lot of them look very similar. Whereas, like, Artorias has a lot of moves. Like, if you compare, so the final boss of Sekiro has 4 phases, which are sort of like 3.5 phases, because the last one's a lot like the third one. Anyway, and any given phase of the final boss of Sekiro has a similar number of moves as Artorias. Like, Artorias has about 12 or 15 moves, which I want to say is on par with any given phase of Sekiro's final boss. So I don't think the sheer number, like, the number of phases in that fight is a complexity that you have to deal with. Like, you have to be in the mode to fight one phase and then quickly shift gears to fighting another phase. That doesn't, I mean, that's not like super difficult to do, but it's not nothing. But in any case, so I have not looked, but so I don't really know. I kind of feel like the tells in Sekiro, they vary in length, obviously. Like if Ishin is like jumping straight at you, it's a very long tell. But he also has a lot that are just a lot shorter. But another major difference is that instead of like just dodging all the time, like you usually do against Artorias, you have to deflect, and so in one sense, deflection might be easier. Again, I don't have exact frame information for Sekiro. Gnomebitten has said that the window for deflection is half a second. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know to what extent. Like, does that mean you have to push and release the deflection button within a half second before an attack connects on you? I don't know. But in any case, if we assume that like the window is half a second for something to happen, that's in a sense more lax than Dark Souls. So you might think that would mean that Sekiro is easier than Dark Souls on that axis. I don't know. I don't know exactly what the fine rules are for deflection in Sekiro. I do know that dodging in Sekiro is a lot different because there's no roll animation. It's not four-way dodging. It's like probably eight or some other way dodging. So, and it's not always correct to just dodge. Like, the range of reactions that you have to attacks is a little bit different. Like, well, there's one input way in which the input to, take no damage from attacks is a lot different from Sekiro to Dark Souls, which is like, if you want to take no damage from an attack in Dark Souls, the button is B, and it's always B. B plus direction is how you dodge. Whereas in Sekiro, the existence of the perilous attacks makes it so that you have a number of different things you have to do. And that single thing probably is a major contributor to the mental energy that I have to expend in Sekiro, because you might, if the answer is to dodge, then it's like B plus a direction. If the answer is Makiri counter, then it's, well, the way I Makiri counter is like neutral B, although I know that other people do it differently, which is very strange. If it's a grab attack, you have to dodge, and if it's a sweep, you have to jump it. So which is a different button. That's actually a different button. It's A instead of B in the default control scheme. And then, like, if you don't Makiri counter something, it's still possible to deflect it. It's just not possible to block. So you can deflect thrust attacks. It's just harder. So the fact that you have multiple inputs that may be required is an extra tax. And also, like, if your dodge involves a jump, then you have like weird directional things that come into play. And in my case, the way that currently plays out is that just a lot of the time I just jump in the wrong direction. So deflection in Sekiro is different from I mean, it's similar in concept, but different in other concepts than parrying in Dark Souls, since like most attacks can be deflected, and you know the reward system for doing that is just significantly different. Because like in Dark Souls, I think only one boss can be parried at all. It's when, whereas in Sekiro, most attacks from most bosses can be deflected. And of course, you know, the reward for that is extra posture damage. So, but you know, one way to think about that is like, what if instead of dodging all of Artorias' attacks and then counterattacking, I had to parry all of Artorias' attacks and then counterattack sometimes. That would be a different game. And that's kind of hard to think about exactly what that would mean for the boss fight. But it would be different, and then I think that is closer to what Sekiro is like. Because certainly, you know, normal enemies attacking you with swords and normal bosses attacking you with basic weapons, most of the time you want to be deflecting that stuff, if you can. Like, it's hard, but that's what you want to be doing. So it's kind of difficult to exactly enumerate what that difference is. Like earlier, I just explained that like the timing window for dodging versus parrying in Dark Souls is very similar. You know, about 7 frames ish. So in that sense, it makes it sound like deflecting all of Artorias' attacks instead of dodging them would be a pretty similar challenge to fighting a Sekiro boss. I don't know. But I think most of the difference is down to refinement in animations. Just because, like, now that I'm doing it, it feels like all of Artorias' tells are just way slower than Ishin's. Like, maybe except that one quick jab. And, I mean, Artorias is also a little bit special in that he fights on, you fight him on a flat, well-lit arena, which, the final boss of Sekiro is, not flat, it's not well-lit, and you also have tall grass everywhere. Like, this fight has tiny little patches of grass, but like the fact that you can't see your enemy's legs a lot of the time means reading tells is pretty tricky. Ugh. So you know, that's like the meat of what I started this stream up to talk about, is differences in the fine dexterity challenges presented by Dark Souls and Sekiro. And to be honest, like a lot of Dark Souls bosses don't even test this axis very much, at least the way I play them. Like Nito, for example, you know, a lot of the bosses against big monstrosities, you know, they're big, and so they have bigger tells. But also, like, bosses like Nito and Four Kings, most of the time you don't really even pay attention to what they're doing. Like, poise is a big difference. Maybe I should talk about that a little bit. Like, right now I have a lot of poise, but in particular, if you're fighting a boss and you're solving your problems with poise, you get to ignore what the boss is doing. Like, I can take hits and poise through them. I'm dodging Artorias because I don't want to get hit. I don't want to get hit and take damage. But against particularly Nito and the Four Kings, like, it's very common to solve those bosses just by having a lot of poise. And then you don't even need to read what the boss is doing. Which, there aren't any bosses in Sekiro like that. That is a big difference between Sekiro and Dark Souls. Like, there are Dark Souls bosses where you can't really get away with that. Any fight where there's more than one enemy, you have to be more careful about that to a greater or lesser extent. Someone like Quelaag, where in Quelaag's case, she spits lava and nobody can really stand in the lava no matter what their poise is. So you have to be aware of that. So that's some amount of awareness. But overall, Dark Souls has, fewer of the bosses require that you read all of their tells. The DLC is kind of different that way in that, well, if you don't count the Sanctuary Guardian, like the other three bosses do pretty much require that you read their tells because, like, it'll, they all have so much health and hit so hard that you can't really get away with nonsense like you can against Four Kings or Seath. Yeah, Seath is pretty much also one where you can ignore a lot of what he does, just not all of it. Like, there are a couple of things that you have to, actually deal with. Whereas in Sekiro, it seems like I'm just trying to think if there are any bosses, like actual bosses, not mini bosses, you can't, or where you can get away with not really paying attention to what they're doing. And I don't think there are any. Like, there's a few mini bosses you can kind of trivialize, like Okami leader Shizu, notably, is a mini boss in the strictest sense, but she's pretty weak to just getting hit with the sword. You can pretty much stun block her. Whereas, and there are also other bosses that are where you have to read what they're doing, but it's so simple that it's not very hard. Like the long arm centipede bosses are kind of interesting in that their close up like melee attack is very rhythmic, and so clearly what's intended is that you get the rhythm and then you deflect every one of those hits, or like most of them at least. And they really will only have two moves. They have the combo attack, and then they have a sweep. So they are interesting, but they still are built on the basic deflection system. All right. And actually, since we were just talking about poise allowing you to ignore bosses, or ignore boss behavior, that is something that they essentially removed from Dark Souls 3. There's still, there's the word poise is used, but it's mechanically different enough that you can't really stand there and just hit a boss until it dies. Alright. The problem with a stream like this is that it doesn't have a good ending point, because I can fight Artorias for a very, very long time. So I think I'm pretty much done. I'm trying to think if I have any other notes. I don't think so. I have a homeward bone. Well, I can almost leave whenever I feel like it. Because Artorias can knock you out of the homeward bone animation. But anyway, that was pretty much all I wanted to do. Thanks for watching. Sekiro will presumably resume tomorrow morning.